Recording in progress.
All right, I will call to order this meeting of the Town of Los Gatos special meeting of the Town Council. This is our strategic priority setting tonight. That will be the only agenda item on our agenda tonight. This is our opportunity for the council to give staff priorities to work on during the year. The council sets policy and budget, and staff executes on that. So this is our opportunity to kind of plan for staff what we'd like them to be working on during the year. If I could have a roll call, and then I guess we'll roll the meeting procedures, please.
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Sayoc.
Here.
Councilmember Hudas.
Here.
Councilmember Badami.
Here.
Vice Mayor Risto.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Rennie.
Here. Okay, and if we could roll the meeting procedures video.
The public is welcome to participate at Town Council meetings, understanding that the purpose of the meetings is to conduct the important business of the town in an efficient and effective manner. At each meeting, the following expectations of civil conduct shall apply. 1. For the benefit of the entire community, the Town of Los Gatos asks that all speakers follow the town's meeting guidelines by treating everyone with respect and dignity. This is done by following meeting guidelines set forth in state law, in the town code, and on the cover sheet of the council agenda. 2. The town embraces diversity and strongly condemns hate speech and offensive hateful language or racial intolerance of any kind at council meetings. 3. Town council and staff are well aware of the public's right to disagree with their professional opinion on various town issues. However, antisocial behavior, slander, hatred, and bigotry statements are completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form at Town Council meetings. 4. All public comments at the Town Council meeting must pertain to items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the town and shall not contain slanderous statements, hatred, and bigotry against non-public officials. 5. The town will go through the following steps if a disturbance results from a member of the public not following these rules. If participating remotely, town staff may mute the individual with an explanation for the record of why muting occurred consistent with this policy. If participating in person, the mayor may call a recess for violation of this policy, resulting in the immediate cessation of the audio and video recording and the council exiting the chamber. Staff will determine if the individual should be removed or if all members of the public should leave, depending on the extent of the disturbance. In the event that all public members exit, only the press would be allowed back in the meeting. Once the individual or individuals leave, the council would return to the chamber and the mayor would resume the meeting. Persons disrupting a council meeting may be cited for violation of the California Penal Code Section 403. These expectations of conduct also apply to meetings of all town boards, committees, and commissions.
Okay, thank you. So first up is going to be verbal communications. This is an opportunity for the public to address us on items that are not on the agenda. You will have 3 minutes. And tonight's agenda is really sort of one large item that is reaffirmation of our strategic priorities, affirming our town goals, looking to see if there's new priorities or things that should be removed, and identifying our ordinance priority. So with that, I will open verbal communication for items that are not on the agenda. I'm not seeing any hands raised up. We got one. If we could bring Mr. Rob Moore forward.
Hello, Mayor and Town Council. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I hope that you're all having a lovely evening. I'm speaking here tonight as a resident of Los Gatos. I'm here tonight to speak briefly about our 21-23 strategic priorities and add some input on potential 22-24 priorities. I feel that our 21-23 strategic priorities do a decent job of encapsulating our collective priorities as a town. And so thank you all for your hard work, and thank you to past councils as well.
So, Mr. Moore, let me interrupt you. I think this sounds like what's on our agenda. So,
okay, so I did. Yep, I thought there being no hands raised may have. Okay, thank you.
So I'll come back to you when we get to the main agenda item. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So if I could have Lindley Hogan, please. Looks like you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I wanted to know if the town council will ever be addressing the critical race theory and diversity, equity, inclusion that's in the town that seems to really be dividing us. I just want to know if any of you would be addressing that this year, and please know that it is a concern of a lot of us. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. So I will close verbal communication. And generally we don't answer questions. We take comments from people. And I could say critical race theory is not on our agenda anytime soon that I see. And it seems to be typically a school issue, so it might be something more for the school board. With that, I will close verbal communication and move on to our main agenda item and turn it over to staff for our running our priority session.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, everyone. Wonderful to see all of you tonight. As the mayor mentioned, tonight is a focused meeting discussing our core goals and strategic priorities. In addition, the council will have an opportunity to prioritize potential ordinances and policy updates. The core goals have been with us for a long time. They really are the foundation of how our budget is built and the allocation of funds. So it is important as we begin our budget development process to have the council reaffirm the core goals of community character, good governance, fiscal stability, civic enrichment, public safety, and quality public infrastructure. The meat of tonight's meeting is also regarding our strategic priorities. And with that, let me ask our assistant town manager to put up the attachment 3 that's in the packet that identifies the ongoing priorities. Last January, as a new council, the council identified and essentially validated a lot of the ongoing work that the town has been considering, including fire protection, emergency preparedness, community vitality. Parking, of course, has been a big issue, traffic, and then prudent fiscal management. Last year, the council added 2 new items. One was being more express about our goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as looking at how we could enhance our senior services. So for that reason, when you look at the in progress column, you'll see that there's a lot of important work already going on in the town. We have really important matters that need to be addressed. One is the general plan. We'd like to get that finished this calendar year. We have our housing element that's now underway. Objective standards are working their way to the Planning Commission, so excellent work there. We are underway, of course, with SB 9 implementation. Regional transportation efforts continue to take a fair amount of time of our parks and public works staff. Diddles Lane is under construction, and we're hopeful for that project to be completed as affordable homes for our residents. And then, as we've discussed last week, we are in the midst of doing a lot of work to really support our business community with pandemic recovery, and the semi-permanent parklets is a huge effort there. We're also very much engaged in other inclusive community efforts. We've been doing outreach, and those results should be available later on this year, as well as revenue enhancements. And we've discussed some of those last week as well. Last night, our senior committee met, and we may hear public testimony on the progress of that committee this evening. But basically, the council asked the senior committee to develop a roadmap or a plan for senior services, and that work is very energetically underway. So with all of this good work underway, the staff capacity for our organization is really at its maximum level. And one of the other attachments in the packet is our regular work plan that identifies all of the core services that we provide day in and day out within all of our departments. So with that, if the council does want to de-emphasize or add something new, we really do need to think about stopping one of these efforts that's already underway in order to create that staff capacity to do new work. I know there are a lot of great ideas out there as identified in the public comments that were part of the addendum and desk item that's before the council. Many of those ideas have been discussed, and if council is interested in discussing those further, staff is prepared. We've got all the directors and other staff available to answer questions for you this evening. So some of those items are longer term, and again, we're happy to discuss why some of them need to have some building blocks put in place before we move forward. So I think really council should be very proud of the work that is underway. It's really intended to enhance our wonderful community of Los Gatos and really move us forward. With that, you can stop sharing the screen, and let me just make a comment on the ordinances before I turn it over to our town attorney. Again, the ordinances list was put together under the leadership of Town Attorney Rob Schultz, with input from all department directors. And so this is staff's idea of what the priorities might be based on past council discussion. And I need to acknowledge that we are missing one of those ordinances, and that is the social host ordinance. Last fall, the council did direct us to work with the high school and our youth commission to update that ordinance. So that should certainly be on the list as council had already directed that work. So that concludes my remarks, and I turn it to the town attorney for further elaboration on the ordinance list. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you is our ordinance list. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but it's up to you on whether you want to reorganize that priority or change or delete any of them. Obviously, there's some of those that have been on that list for 3 or 4 years that we simply don't have the time or resources to get to. So I don't expect us to get all the way through these. If you ask me, it'd probably be through, 4, 5, and 6 is usually what we do. The most I think we've ever done is 9, 10 ordinances in a year. So it just depends on work order and the other. Some of these are very intensive to accomplish and other ones are not. As the town manager mentioned, the social host ordinance is one, and then another one came up today that's been on my radar that didn't make it, which is our amplified sound ordinance. A few years ago, we amended and created a policy regarding entertainment at night and not requiring a permit unless you're doing entertainment after 10 p.m. But it does conflict with our amplified ordinance and create some other issues with the wording that's just ambiguous. So that's one that I'd probably issue. I'd probably put the social host ordinance number 3. As the memo states, I'm currently working with the Youth Commission on the plastic ordinance and would take that up directly thereafter, almost at the same time. I went to the Youth Commission special meeting last week, and we'll be going to their meeting in February to kind of finalize the plastic ordinance to bring to you. And at that same time, I'll start doing the social host ordinance with them. With that, I'll open it up for any discussion or questions or comments that you have regarding the ordinance list.
So let me do it this way. Let me take any questions you have now that you want kind of heard before we take public comment. And then I'll take public comments and then we'll work through, staff suggested a process of, doing it in 4 pieces, starting with affirming our core goals, which everything sprouts from, if we're happy with those or not, and then affirm our current strategic priorities, and then consider any new priorities. And because we are pretty much full bandwidth still working on last year's priorities, we'll need to identify priorities we want to take off the list if we want to add new things to the list. And then we'll do the ordinances last. So I'll do public comment only once. So right now, I will open it up to council questions before we take public testimony. So we'll start with Councilmember Badami.
Thank you, Mayor. For the town attorney, you are recommending the social host ordinance as item number 3, which we currently have the commercial cannabis operations. So is that replacing or just moving down cannabis to number 4? Can you just give me your thought process
Sure.
on that?
Yeah, the social ordinance, host ordinance takes very few hours, and although the cannabis ordinance will occur, it won't happen till probably June is when it will come back to you. So the whole social host I can do probably about the same time that I bring forward the plastic ordinance, because neither of those are very complicated ordinances. So that would be number 3, and then 4 would be cannabis. So each one after that would drop, and then amplified sound ordinance would go after. Oh, my screen just went. But they would be numbered. They wouldn't come off the list. They would just subsequently be a lower priority at this particular time. And it's not so much priority, it's when I believe I can get these done. Some of them can come very quickly, the tree ordinance, whereas SB 9 on the list really will come forward to you after HCD gives their guidelines. So although that's a much higher priority and it could jump forward, let's suppose HCD came out with their guidelines in January and we found that was in conflict with your urgency ordinance, surely that then would jump on priority. So I think if that helps answers your question.
Yes,
Okay.
it does. Thank you very much.
Let's go to Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. I also had questions for the town attorney, although it sounds like as you're answering these others, I can guess the answer, but it looks like there's some items on here that need updating. And so, for example, the accessory dwelling unit ordinance, if our present ordinance is not in sync with what's required by the state, does that just mean that as issues come up, the state law takes precedence and we just need to catch up, or are we exposed legally in any way, or does this just create a little bit of confusion until it gets straightened out? And similar thing with the sign ordinance.
It's a combination of both. It absolutely creates confusion with the public because they read our ordinance and believe that's what they need to comply with. And we have to tell them, no, it's not consistent with state law and we must follow state law. So it doesn't create any liability on us, but it creates that confusion that we want to eliminate with the public and transparency. So that's why we need to catch up and make sure both of those ordinances are consistent with state law.
Okay, thank you. And I assume similar thing with the lot merger.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Did the clerk have something she wants to add?
Just want to say we're having a little bit of feedback issue. So we think it might be because your mic is on when other people are talking. So if you can mute when you're not talking, we'll see if that helps the problem, please.
Okay,
Thank you.
let's go to Councilmember Hudis.
Thank you. I just have really one question now, and then I assume, Mayor, we're going to come back to this and give our priorities at the end of the
Yes,
meeting.
yes, and you can ask questions all the time also.
Yeah, okay. So the question I have is about number 2. And I wanted to understand a little bit about the rationale for implementing this at the town level rather than at the county or state level. Are there things coming down from the county or the state that would address this, or are we doing something that's, out front of the requirements at other levels?
You're still
So-
muted, Rob. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. So my computer is moving very slowly, but number 2 is the single-use disposable foodware that we're working on. No, it's completely different, although state has implemented some of those guidelines. And we can comply with state law. The Youth Commission would actually like you to consider other requirements. And they're doing a phased approach also. They've done a lot of research and looked at communities that have implemented such bans on some of the plastic areas. But certainly if state law had already approved it, then we wouldn't have to. But I think we need to look at it from the standpoint, if the state doesn't implement some of these things, should we implement them ahead of it? But certainly the state is looking at many of these issues.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that's all the questions from council at the moment. I'm going to go to public comments, and I would say, feel free to give us comments on the 4 areas we're going to work on, which are our core goals, our current priorities, strategic priorities, whether we should be thinking of new priorities and which ones we could get rid of, and then any input on the order of the potential ordinances. With that, we will start with Ali Milano.
Hi, I address the town council tonight as a resident and Los Gatos Anti-Racism Coalition member to talk about an important issue tied to many other town issues, rats. Starting in the fall of 2020, when my neighbor gutted his newly purchased farmhouse to expand it, I noticed strange sounds in the walls and attic of my own 2-bedroom bungalow. On a couple of disturbing occasions, I even saw these large free creatures. Thanks to a wonderful exterminator, my home is now free of rats, but not without forking out a good $1,500 and counting, which is no small change to a widow on a teaching salary. Lest we think the problem has been solved, however, last fall, my Labradoodle Bochi and I were strolling up Ellenwood Ave between a home that had been raised and another one that had been gutted when I jumped at seeing a large live rat just a foot from Bochi and me. My scream provided entertainment for the construction crew, but the incident made me wonder if, whenever a house is raised or gutted, which is pretty common in Los Gatos, we're bound to see rats. Fast forward to last December, and I saw another one, this time in front of the old museum on Tate in Maine, once again precisely across the street from another cute little farmhouse raised to make room for another mega home. This points to issues I've spoken about here before, but that bear repeating. One is that we continue to ignore systemic homelessness while 2 of our former museums lie vacant. The other one is defacement and destruction of smaller historic homes to make way for mega homes that exceed the FAR, increase gentrification, jack up home prices, spoil the town's charm, and damage the ecosystem. Yet the Town Planning Commission and Council have repeatedly over the years permitted this overbuilding for countless homes, marring our hillsides and mountain views, as can now be seen by yet another proposed monstrosity, an elite senior home atop the once beautiful Mount El Sereno. But there's another issue. I searched the internet to find out who picks up dead rats on public property in Los Gatos. I called the number listed, and it turned out to be a police dispatcher. Really? By now, we're painfully aware of police complaints that there are too few dispatchers. Also, coalition members have repeatedly requested that we ask police to do police work justly and assign social workers to mental health crises. But rats? Really? It seems that the fallout from overbuilding goes to the little people, the young couple living in their car in the Whole Foods parking lot, people of color who can't afford to live here either, the dispatcher taking calls about dead rats instead of pertinent issues, and yes, the widow on a teaching salary. I hope that in 2022, as you craft this year's priority, as well as the general plan, you remember that we'd like to make more room for more racially and socioeconomically diverse folks here, not less. In the meantime, if you happen to come across any rats in town, that may be a sign that you're moving in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Milano. I don't see any questions for you, so thank you. I'll move on to Jack Van Naden.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, council. Good evening, staff. The Los Gatos Community Alliance strongly recommends that the fiscal year 22-24 priorities include completing a fiscal impact analysis for the draft 2040 plan prior to any consideration by the Planning Commission and the Town Council. My reasons follow. As you know, the current draft general plan proposes increasing the population by around 30% or 9,000 people over the next 20 years, far out of line with our past growth curve and bizarrely double the RHNA requirement. In a staff memo on January 22nd, it said, and I'll quote, "The goal of the session is to affirm and/or refine existing priorities. Given the town's ongoing responses to the COVID-19 pandemic and work underway with existing priorities, the town organization has no staff capacity to add new items on top of the existing ones. In addition, the town has limited financial capacity to add significant new items as town revenues continue to be impacted by the pandemic." End quote. My question to you, Council, is what effect will it have when what will be the workload of the staff, and what task will it take our finances? If you think high staff turnover is a problem now, add 9,000 more people to the population and try not to add staff. Without a financial report that complements and amplifies the EIR, you will have no idea of the costs you are going to generate for our future. With the exception of one or two council members, for many years, few have cared about our financial status, and look where it has gotten us today. Let me give you a quick example. The current EIR states that, quote, "Much of the town's storm drainage system is outdated, shallow, and undersized," end quote. The EIR never discusses the dollar investment required to increase the capacity, nor the dollar investment required to treat stormwater discharge to comply with federal and state laws. The only physical comment the EIR makes is the town is working to upgrade these systems as resources are programmed and allocated. That's our financial planning. That's about as deep as we go. We, the citizens, want to know what impact this draft general plan will have on the future of the town we love. We aren't going to know that without a financial impact report. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions for you, Mr. Van Natus, so I will move on to Tom Pickrow.
Hello, I'm Tom Pickrow, Chair of the Town's Senior Services Committee. My purpose is to speak in support of the proposed town strategic priorities. Specifically, the Senior Service Committee endorses the inclusion of engaging seniors element under ongoing priorities. And we support the roadmap, the senior roadmap entry listed under in progress. We are excited by this opportunity and pledge to work hard with the council administration, the CHSS Commission, and town service providers and the broader community in this effort to enrich the lives of our seniors. Our vision is for Los Gatos to be a place where seniors thrive. To mention just a few of the initial efforts of our recently formed committee, one, a community assessment survey for older adults that was contracted by the council with SASE was launched this week. The validated survey to randomly selected Los Gatos 60+ households will continue until its close on March 15th. At the same time, we are gathering informal data through outreach to the community to better understand local needs and community perspectives. To do this, we will be holding survey workshops at service clubs, other community groups, and in public meetings. The first one being tomorrow with the Los Gatos Lions. We have completed the committee's draft vision, mission, and work plan and hope to bring it soon to the council for approval. And finally, also, you probably saw our front page article in the January Outlook paper or the recent notice in the Los Gatos. I just wanted to mention that we are working hard to publicize our town's effort, as well as to engage with our service provider partners and with the community at large. Finally, I'd like to end by saying our committee members would like to thank you for the opportunity to be part of this critically important effort for seniors. With the recent census confirming that 21% of our town's population is over 65 and our senior demographic is growing rapidly, the town's identifying this area of engaging seniors as a priority could not be more timely. So we thank you for the honor of being part of this effort.
Thank you, Mr. Pecro. The part of I don't like having to mute all the time, then I have to unmute every time I talk. Thank you, Mr. Pecro. I'm not seeing any hands raised, so thank you. And we will move on to Kylie Clark. I think I also did not mention, I mentioned in verbal communication, it was going to be 3 minutes. This is also 3 minutes for the verbal communication on this particular agenda item. So Kylie Clark, looks like you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. My name is Kylie Clark, and I'm the Public Policy Coordinator at West Valley Community Services, a nonprofit fighting poverty by providing critical services to the low-income and unhoused of 5 municipalities, including Los Gatos. I'm also a resident of the wonderful town of Los Gatos. Thank you so much for taking the time to revisit the strategic priorities of the town and for inviting public input during the process. While these are all very important goals, as the town changes, the goals must as well. One thing that I think could be more incorporated into the strategic priorities is environmental sustainability. As Mayor Rennie pointed out during his inaugural speech, during the last couple of years, environmental issues have naturally taken a backseat in Los Gatos due to the pandemic. However, climate change hasn't stopped, and I think it's time for the town to revisit environmental goals. It would be great to see environmental sustainability as its own strategic priority, but even more explicitly and deeply incorporating it into other ongoing priorities such as emergency preparedness, fire protection, and transportation demand management would be great. The area where I and West Valley Community Services sees the biggest gap, however, is housing. While I read the staff report and understand that the housing element occupies its own silo, it is important to keep in mind that we are setting our strategic priorities for 2022 through 24, and the housing element is due on January 1st of 2023, leaving 2 years of opportunity. Housing and affordable housing are some of the most talked about and most urgent issues facing our town, and I believe that they deserve their own dedicated area, even taking the housing element into consideration. In order to effectively change what housing looks like in Los Gatos, resources need to be put into this, and the strategic priorities are an important mechanism for affirming its importance and for dedicating town resources to this issue. Again, thank you so much for taking the time to do this, and thank you for all that you do as council members and staff. Good night.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. I don't see any hands for you, so thank you. And I will move to Rob Stump.
Good evening, Council. My name is Rob Stump, and I'm a Hillside resident of Los Gatos. I also served as the chair of the ad hoc wildfire committee commissioned by the town council. That committee considered a broad range of wildfire mitigation policy and project options and provided the council with a report of our findings. The top priority, focus on projects that would save lives. My role today, I continue working with Arne Andrews to move recommended action items to implementation. With public safety being the top strategic priority, I'm requesting the council's consideration on 2 items: enhanced emergency communications and roadside fuel reduction. First, emergency communications. While we have several methods for emergency communications, they all rely on our current telecommunications network, and in most cases, the cellular network. They also rely on voluntary opt-in coverage, so coverage is far from complete. The ad hoc committee recommended that we explore a non-cell, non-subscriber-based emergency communication system. So last August, we began investigation on mass notification systems. These systems, based on long-range acoustical technology, allow for verbal commands to be communicated to residents. Residents in the Wildland Urban Interface, or the WUI, would receive notifications and specific directions as needed. The cost for a turnkey system would be in the neighborhood of $1.2 million. This is a key item for the council to consider in its FY 2022 CIP. Second, we've got to continue funding for roadside fuel reduction. The program began in late 2020 to reduce roadside fuel in the WUI's 31.5 miles of public roadways. A total of 6.5 miles of roadway was completed. In FY 2021, CIP another $500,000 was allocated. This level of funding or higher needs to continue so that all 31.5 miles of fuel reduction work can be completed over the next 4 years or less. In addition, the town needs to increase its operating budget to support ongoing vegetation management. First, we've got to reduce the trim cycle. Current funding supports a 25-year cycle. It must be reduced to 5 to 6 years. Second, enhanced vegetation management. Funding needs to support 1 to 2 vegetation management passes on the roadways annually. And third, emergency tree removal. Funding needs to support removal of dead or dying trees on the roadways. Good work has been done and is being done by the town to prepare and prevent wildfires. We need to continue making investments to prevent loss of life and property damage. The items proposed tonight, the mass notification system and roadside fuel reduction, including increased funding, are central to our efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stump. I don't see any, I do see a question for you. Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Stump. This might be a question for staff, but it sounds like if we're, tonight we're talking about priorities, we're not deciding about funding allocation. Is that correct?
I'll let the town manager answer that, but that's pretty much the case.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, the comments this evening are certainly welcome. And on February 15th, the council will be considering providing to staff budget direction. So we will carry forward any budget related items to that February conversation. But we do have emergency preparedness and vegetation management as an ongoing priority as identified by Mr. Stump.
Okay, well then thank you for the reminder for why we need to keep this a priority and what we can eventually do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions for you, Mr. Stump. Thank you for speaking. Next is Jim Foley.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and Honorable Town Council. Jim Foley here, President-elect of the Los Gatos Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. I wanted to start by thanking you all for the opportunity to meet individually with yourselves and representatives from the Chamber at the end of last year to discuss challenges and opportunities the town is facing in coming years. We appreciate the list of strategic priorities town staff has assembled and wanted to touch on a few of them tonight. We agree the biggest priority for the town is moving the general plan process forward. It has been drawn out for far too long by the pandemic and some other factors, and it's time to make sure all the outstanding concerns are addressed in a timely fashion and the general plan is approved. We also want to re-highlight the Dixon parking study and ensure that the employee parking program that recently rolled out is followed up on and further implemented, but also that the next steps identified in the plan, including wayfinding signage and any other recommendations that can be achieved, are prioritized. In the 2021 priorities, it mentions the streamlining process that I think was largely through the planning department and economic vitality. The streamlining process was a huge success for the business community. It's indicated as completed, but we don't feel the job is totally done yet. Understanding the pandemic had a massive impact on the ability for town staff to operate efficiently, it's more important now than ever to bolster town staff's ability to move new projects through the pipeline. There are recent examples of major holdups in the permitting processes, and all of the progress that was made in the years leading up to the pandemic is in jeopardy, as the reputation of so difficult to get a business open in Los Gatos is rearing its ugly head once again. Another highlight on the list of priorities under community vitality is the community events. Last year, we saw the overwhelming success of the Thursday promenades and how well they supported the local businesses and were enjoyed by the residents. We would like to see the next version of them continue in 2022. Lastly, we understand the town is potentially implementing a system of key performance indicators to ensure these strategic goals are met. We believe this is mission critical to the town's future success. We are still in recovery from the pandemic and likely will be through this year. Once again, we need to step on the accelerator on all these items. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Foley. We do have one question from Councilmember Badami.
Thank you. It's not so much a question, but it's more of a comment for the public and for Mr. Foley. He addressed the issue. The Council Policy Committee met earlier today, and we discussed future agenda items that we'll be reviewing through the upcoming months. And one of those items is streamlining the planning process. So we'll be looking forward to participation from the public as we move forward with that item.
Thank you. And I will note that Mr. Foley was specifically targeting the permitting process, which is sort of, I think our CDD has kind of a planning section and a permitting section. And I think he was focused on the permitting section could have some streamlining in it. So I don't see any other questions for Mr. Foley, so I will move on to Rob Moore.
Hello, Mayor and Town Council. I am back. I'll jump back into my comment and try not to repeat myself. I feel that our 21-23 strategic priorities do a good job of encapsulating our collective priorities as a town. So again, thank you for your hard work on that. I'm excited to reaffirm these commitments, especially when it comes to emergency preparedness and fire protection, as climate change only continues to make disasters worse. I think our quality of life priorities continue to be important, especially when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and also when it comes to land use planning. I would like. Did I mute myself?
You did mute yourself.
Oh my God, this is not my night. Okay. What I am mostly, so thank you all for that. I am also generally very supportive of the town attorney's proposed priority of town ordinances. So thank you on all of that. One area where I feel new priorities and commitments should be made is in the area of affordable housing. Our 21-23 priorities mention the Dittos Lane Affordable Housing Project, which I greatly appreciate, and I would like us to undertake new initiatives similar to this to prioritize the development of new affordable housing. I understand well that the town does not build housing, so this may not be a perfect fit for a staff priority, but creating affordable housing is clearly a major priority for many folks in town. And so I think we should be investing staff time and resources into finding new ways to incentivize building affordable housing in Los Gatos. Making affordable housing a strategic priority will fit nicely under multiple of our community's core goals, including community character and quality public infrastructure. And finally, I know that regardless of if affordable housing makes its way into this document, many of you hold this as a personal priority, which I am deeply thankful for. Thank you all for your time this evening. Take care.
Got to keep unmuting myself. Thank you, Mr. Moore. I will ask just one clarifying question. When you talk about new affordable housing initiatives, as you said, we don't build housing. We did at one point try to build affordable housing when we had RDA money, but without it, it's very difficult. One opportunity we may have is in our housing element to add programs towards how to get maybe more affordable housing out of projects brought to us by developers or otherwise. Is this an adequate place in your mind to put that then in the housing element process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think also what I'm talking about is just trying to get, and I know this doesn't mean a whole lot, but get more creative with this, because I think we have seen other towns and cities do really interesting things with partnering with nonprofit housing developers. And I know we don't have land as a town that we can necessarily give to nonprofit housing developers, but I do think there's interesting partnerships that we could work on creating. And so, yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't see any other questions for you. So we'll move on to Jack Neumer.
Hi, Council. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Thank you for giving me the time to speak tonight. My name is Jack Neumer, and I'm a teenage resident of the town of Los Gatos. I'm also a member of the town of Los Gatos Youth Commission. I'm here tonight to voice my support for the town attorney, Rob Schultz's priorities list, specifically priority number 2, in which he's working with the Youth Commission to ban plastic foodware in the town. I believe that this is a very important ordinance, as is an important step for the town to become more environmentally friendly, and the entire Youth Commission wholeheartedly supports this ordinance. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a great night.
Thank you, Mr. Neumer. I don't see any questions for you, so thank you, and we'll move on to Cameron Imami.
Hello, Council. Can you hear me all right? All right. My name is Cameron Imami, and I am a Los Gatos resident. I'm currently a member of the Los Gatos Town Youth Commission, and I'm the other co-chair to the Youth Commission's Environmental Subcommittee, as you just heard from Jack Neumer. I joined this meeting today just to also support Town Attorney Rob Schultz's list of priorities, and as Jack said, specifically item number 2, which aims to reduce plastic waste in our town. I believe it is crucial that our town makes more efforts to be environmentally friendly, and this item specifically can address that. We as a town must go beyond state mandates to ensure an eco-friendly town of the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I don't see any questions for you, Mr. Imami, so I will move on to Jeffrey Suzuki.
Hello, everybody. You all know me. I served a 1-year term as planning commissioner last year. I'm president of the Los Gatos Anti-Racism Coalition, and my message is quite simple. We need affordable housing. Over the course of this pandemic, thousands of homeless people have died. And the fact is that if we don't do our part to build affordable housing, we will have blood on our hands. That's not an exaggeration. People in my generation and seniors are being priced out of this community. And we have to do something about this. We all have to do something about this. This goes beyond Ditto's Lane. It should be prioritized across the town explicitly. And I want to take a moment because there's this claim that's floating around about the 2040 general plan that I just have to address, which is that we're going to almost double the units of what is required under RHNA, but this is extremely misleading. And I think all of you are aware of how misleading this is. The opposition claims that the town of Los Gatos plans to develop 3,738 units, to be precise, overshooting the RHNA obligation of around 2,000 units. But we know that 975 of these units are not actually planned under the general plan, and 500 of them are ADUs, 475 of them are planned under the previous general plan. This leaves 2,763 units. So their claim that it's double the RHNA is completely false. This is above 2,000 units, but not the double that some are arguing. Now, I want to take a moment to explain why these 2,763 units really shouldn't be a concern for us. First, these units are planned and are not guaranteed to be developed by any means. Like, for example, our current general plan planned for 900 housing units in 20 years, only 300 of which have actually been developed. So if anything, overshooting our RHNA is probably for the best, since we will realistically build only a fraction of the units that we planned for. And secondly, another important point is that our RHNA is on an 8-year timeline, while our general plan is 20 years, more than twice that time. After this RHNA cycle is finished, we'll be assigned another RHNA number where the leftover units in our general plan will be relevant. So this fear of overdevelopment has been overblown to epic proportions. I think that while the 2040 general plan is imperfect, we should pass it It's a simple, moderate, straightforward way of getting at least some affordable housing units, some mixed-use housing units. It puts us moving in the right direction. Will it give us all the affordable housing units that we'll need? Does it 100% build affordable housing? No, it's not. It's an imperfect solution, but at least it acknowledges the economics of the situation. We do need to build some housing in order to have some affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Suzuki. I'm not seeing any hands raised. So thank you for those comments, and I will go to Amy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, we can. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. I just wanted to thank the town council for your work in general. I know it's been a particularly challenging year for town council, so I wanted to acknowledge your work. I especially wanted to call out your efforts in diversity, equity, and inclusion and urge you to recommit to that in the strategic plan. I also believe that fire protection is critical for all of us. And I will add that I also agree that affordable housing is needed in Los Gatos, and it is a key component for increasing diversity and enriching the lives of all of us and taking care of society in general, helping out the unhoused, and basically opening up Los Gatos for other people to enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. I'm not seeing any questions for you. Next up, Catherine Summers.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for holding this special meeting tonight to look back on the priorities that you set at the middle of last year and to evaluate if those are still at the top of your list. The Chamber has not wavered much in supporting your original list, and I will review those in just a minute. First, though, there is one that we did assume was just going to kind of roll along and happen, and that was the General Plan 2040. As you probably have all figured out now, we are sort of at an impasse on that. So I do ask, why are we not doing a fiscal impact analysis on the general plan? Regardless of whether or not the housing numbers change after planning looks at it and after council reviews it, we are still going to have somewhere between a 15 and 30% population growth. Are we a little concerned and a little curious as to what fiscal impact that might have on the town, both positively and negatively? From possible new sales tax sources to infrastructure issues, we really could use a consultant to help us figure out what that growth might look like. And now I'll switch to my talking points about economic vitality, a subject with which the Chamber is a little more familiar and a little more opinionated. We are on the cusp of something good here. Foot traffic was definitely on the rise in the spring and summer and even the fall of 2021. After the summer promenades, the December promenade, and the holiday festivities, most merchants who we questioned gave us a thumbs up. Unfortunately, with this recent COVID surge in January, I'm sure you have noticed a little bit of a slowdown. We still have to reckon with the damage from this COVID virus. So we urge you to continue to prioritize economic vitality. Parking, the Dixon study. We're so close, yet so far. The sounds of summer. We've talked about the jazz on the plaza, the music in the park, and the possibility of the promenades coming back. We have taken steps to now collaborate with all three of us together so that we come up with a great program for summer of 2022. And we hope that you will consider those. Old Town. We've met with Old Town and they have some amazing plans on the horizon. And we hope that you will make sure that you see those before too long so that we can get those going. Destination marketing. 2021 was not a great year for metrics. And we have a ways to go, but I'm confident we are figuring it out. The TOT revenues are still down by more than $1 million, but we cannot give up yet. We need to keep investing in destination marketing. Parklets, you've got that. There are still ARPA funds available. Last time I checked, we had 7.2 million. We spent about 3.2. We still have money, so there's no reason to panic. I hope you might consider some of these things I'm bringing to the table tonight And maybe we can have some sort of productive conversation in the near future. Thank you. And I support the senior services too. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Ms. Summers. I don't see any hands raised. And so thank you. I don't see any other hands raised from the public either. One more from, okay, Emily Thomas. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Emily Thomas, and I'm a planning commissioner and resident of Los Gatos. Tonight, I am speaking as a resident. First, I would like to thank you for providing the public with the opportunity to speak tonight. I appreciate the council's efforts in addressing pressing needs of the community and support the proposed strategic priorities for 2022 through 2024. I am speaking tonight to ask that the council and our town staff make the definitions for the core goals more available to the public. As a planning commissioner, I've seen the definitions in the commissioner's handbook. However, I don't think the intention of each of the goals is clear to the general public as presented in the strategic priorities document or on the town website. In addition, I do have some concern about the definition of community character. As it's stated, to preserve and enhance the appearance, character, and environmental quality of the community. As some council members know, because you were there, we were all there, the language of preserve was used very sparingly throughout the 2040 general plan, and that was a major and intentional shift from our previous general plans. So just the use of preserve, I'm asking you to just kind of contemplate whether that is truly reflective of our town's current core goals. Lastly, because I believe that the word preserve does not reflect our town or community's current priorities. Lastly, I just want to share my support for the amendments to the tree protection ordinance to strengthen code enforcement, increase civil penalties for illegal tree removal or damage, and protection of trees that provide valuable ecosystem services to the community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. I don't see any hands raised from council for questions, so thank you very much. And I don't see any other hands raised from the public either. So I will go ahead and close public comment and come back to council. And so my request for council is if we could work on our core goals first, since I think everything flows from that. The question is, do you want to make changes or are you happy with them? Our core goals are community character, good governance, fiscal stability, quality public infrastructure, civic enrichment, and public safety. Any questions or comments or a motion maybe affirming these goals? Councilmember Badami.
I'm happy with the goals, and I cannot find a reason not to reaffirm those goals. So I'll go ahead and make a motion to reaffirm the town goals of community character, good governance, fiscal stability, civic enrichment, public safety, and quality public infrastructure.
Sounds good. Councilmember Sayak.
Well, go ahead. I'm seconding the motion. But I do think there is a good point that Ms. Thomas raised. I think all of us take advantage of the fact that we talk about this on a regular basis, but we forget that these definitions may not necessarily be the same, may not be defined by our public in a similar way. So I'm kind of curious myself where we can find some of that. And so I'm seconding the motion. I'm not adding on, but if I could just ask the town manager to provide either through a weekly memo where we can find that, those definitions, to make sure that we're all consistent and talking from the same page.
I was actually curious also from Ms. Thomas where she was getting her definitions from.
Thank you very much for the question. So it is in the commissioner handbook. It's one of the pieces that's published in the commissioner handbook, which is available online from the town clerk website. But I think to the speaker's point, it's probably time to refresh those definitions. I think those are probably about 10 years old. I think the goals themselves are still very solid. They certainly reflect the work that we do day in and day out as a town. But I think we could certainly use some more modern language to further refine them. So that's a good point, and that'll be some work item. And I think we'll make it a little bit more express. So I plan to put the revised definitions up on the town manager's website. So that way they're right next to the strategic priorities and available as people look at both documents. Thank you.
And is that something that's appropriate for the policy committee to look at?
I'd be happy to bring that to the policy committee. We can do that in February if the chair is amenable. I think this is important enough that we bring that, and then we can bring it to the full council to make sure that that all the definitions align with the values that you bring as well.
All right, Councilmember Badami.
As the chair of the Council Policy Committee, I would be amenable to that. Thank you, Ms. Privetti.
All right, so I do have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion from council members? Not seeing any hands, I will go ahead and call the question. Councilmember Badami.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Risto.
Aye.
Councilmember Sayak.
Aye.
Councilmember Hudes.
Aye.
And the mayor votes aye. That passes unanimously. So next we go to sort of the big question of our current strategic priorities. Are we happy with what we have? Do we want to make changes, add and eliminate, and so forth? Any questions from council members? Maybe I'll start off with ask some questions of staff based on several comments from the public. So the Senior Services Committee, it's currently included in our ongoing priorities. That's correct, right?
Yes, it is. The enabling resolution called for the creation of a roadmap, which is very much underway thanks to the hard work of the committee.
And then the emergency communication and roadside fuel reduction, that's part of one of our priorities already also, correct?
Right. Well, the roadside fuel reduction is something that we're doing right now. And we continue to look for funding to make sure that we can continue that effort to get all the miles done. We are exploring different funding mechanisms for the communication enhancement that Mr. Stump referenced. And on February 15th, the council will be considering potential additional ARPA allocations as well as budget direction. And so that might be more appropriate for more specific direction at that particular time. I'd also like to invite our assistant town manager, who's been working with our partners on these issues, to provide any other updates on our wildfire protection efforts so that the council and public have a sense of all the work that's underway. Thank you.
Thank you. The only thing I would add specifically to the concept of an alert notification system, that is embedded in the ad hoc wildfire mitigation plan, which is currently an ongoing priority under the safety element. So all of that is embodied within that document.
Okay, thank you. So let me ask about the Dixon study, Dixon parking study implementation. That falls under current strategic priorities now also?
Yes, it does. However, we have a question from Councilmember Sayak, so I don't know if you want to go to that question. I don't know if this is pertaining to fire or no. Okay.
Councilmember Sayak, did you have?
I can wait until after. I think I just
Okay.
raised it in general.
Okay, I have a few that I just wanted to clear from the public, if that's okay.
Yes.
So the answer was yes, it is included in one of the strategic priorities.
Yes, we are implementing, it's one of the ongoing priorities. So under in progress, we didn't list everything that's in progress because basically we would be replicating everything in the left-hand column, because essentially everything in the left-hand column is in progress. And the Dixon parking study is one of them. Right now, council has provided funding for the downtown employee parking program, which is definitely underway, and then the wayfinding. So we will be bringing those items forward. But basically, essentially everything in the left-hand column is occurring. The in progress are really the big, more visible items, but it's not to say that there isn't other things happening on the left-hand column.
Okay, I'm just trying to check to make sure many of the comments are included already, and we don't need to invent a new priority to cover them, for example. So one that's less obvious to me is we were asked about environmental sustainability and having a goal there. We mentioned environmental sustainability and climate resiliency as part of our general plan. Is that really a full strategic priority, or is that just a tag along to the priority of getting the general plan done?
Well, once we have a general plan update, the council will essentially have a whole new set of action items to consider. And amongst those action items are quite a number of things that will enhance our environmental sustainability, our climate resiliency, and further protect us from wildfire danger. So before we can move on any of those environmental action items, we need the general plan updated. So council will have subsequent opportunities to prioritize and provide funding for those action items. So we've given a lot of thought to how we continue to move forward on environmental sustainability. We could certainly call that out a little bit more expressly. And in addition, I know Matt Morley has done a fair amount of work through the environmental sustainability work on a townwide basis. And we will be updating our website so the public will have one single place to go to see all the sustainability efforts that have really occurred throughout all departments, our LEED buildings, our energy conservation efforts, et cetera. And I apologize, Director Morley, if you would like to add in terms of other things. I know your team is really busy implementing state laws and a lot of other great work.
I think that's what I wanted to highlight, is that there's a lot of work that the town is already doing, and we should be proud of the work that we're doing. There's an entire program in my department that's committed to that, and it touches many departments throughout the town. So there's just a ton of work. We'll increase our storytelling behind that, so the council and the public are aware of all the great efforts that the council is advancing in that area.
Okay, thank you. One more question, and then I'll go to other council members. So there was questions about an affordable housing initiative. Could you make comments on how we might move forward with that, and if it's covered under any strategic priorities or we need to enhance?
Thank you. And I think, Mr. Mayor, you gave a very good response to one of the speakers earlier when referencing our housing element. Our housing element is really a key policy document to really direct investment in affordable housing. And specifically, we are going to have to create programs that the state approves as bona fide ways of creating affordable housing. Once we have a housing element, again, there will be action items and council will need to prioritize those, and putting into place, whether it's code changes or programs, partnerships, as was mentioned, this is going to be a heavy lift. And I think what the state is going to be looking to us for is our commitment to actually follow through, so that these programs aren't just words on a page, but that we're actually working towards meeting those. And let me just invite our Director of Community Development, Joel Paulson, to add on some of the things that he's been hearing from his colleagues who are also working on housing elements. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. I would just add also, I think one of the speakers talked about the potential for incentives to encourage affordable housing. Those also will be items that we will look at in the housing element from an implementation program standpoint. This housing element cycle is not only has the challenge of the increased RHNA, which everyone in California is aware of, but there's also a number of other topic areas that are really going to force the town to look pretty deep at some of the existing policies and programs we have, so that we can make sure that we meet the intent of things such as affirmatively furthering fair housing. So number of topics in that front. We will be continuing with the housing element update process. We're doing some background work on potential sites for future sites inventory analysis. And so we'll be taking some of that forward for background purposes to the Housing Element Advisory Board, then going out to the public to receive input from them, and then funneling that back to the Housing Element Advisory Board so that we can try to narrow down that list of sites and then see where that puts us in terms of our existing general plan from a density standpoint, for instance, versus the draft plan versus somewhere in between those numbers. So a lot of work on that front, a lot of implementation programs that are going to be necessary, and many of them will be touching on incentivizing building affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. I realize I kind of monopolized starting the questions. I wanted to kind of cover a lot of what the speakers had covered. Let me go to Councilmember Sayak.
Thanks, Mayor. And a lot of the questions have been asked. I guess I want to rephrase this a little different. Director Morley said the storytelling behind a lot of the policies. And I know we've had a lot of conversations about the work that town staff actually does. And for example, we talked about environmental sustainability, and does it make sense to call it out, or is it, or as one priority, or does it make sense to have it more interwoven in a lot of other strategic priorities? There's no right or wrong, but I guess what I wanted to comment on now that questions have been answered is that a lot of what has been raised, staff are doing it. And so it's not necessarily a priority, but as some guidance as staff comes back to prepare the budget, does it make sense to invest in a communication person, someone that can help provide the stories and communicate it in a way so that a lot of these questions don't come up on a regular basis? I think we all feel confident the work is happening. It's just hard to articulate it on one page. And if there's a better way perhaps to do that, whether it's on the website, whether through our documents, so that someone can weave the different stories together. So that was one. And then the second part is I'm gonna affirm all the priorities you have here. But again, knowing that we're having more discussion as this process continues, I think with the DEI effort specifically, what's helpful is not only the policies that we're pushing forward, but when staff comes back in February, how we're utilizing town funds on an equitable basis. If you could be prepared to help guide us in that discussion so that we feel confident that we're looking at the entire town as we start to distribute not only infrastructure capital funds, but also how these funds are being used so that really we're touching all residents in an equitable manner. And so I guess those are the comments. It's affirming this, but I know it's an ongoing process and just specific asks for when the more detailed information comes back in February. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. I also want to affirm these priorities. I think last year we had a fairly new town council. 3 of us were new to the council, and working with our experienced council members, I think the work we did to establish priorities, the fact that a year later we're looking at these knowing that work is going on and they're long-term priorities. They're not something that can just be checked off right away. I think this forwards the good work of our town, and I feel like these are priorities that can keep moving us forward. One of the questions I have is, sustainability is not called out directly. As it gets to the policy committee, I hope that the words sustainability somehow end up in the definitions of our core goals, because I think that is a core goal of our community, and it's been one for our council for quite a while, and that work is going on. So if that's not already spelled out, and I apologize for not having those definitions in front of me, I hope that is considered how that can be discussed. In terms of implementation programs for the general plan, I mean, we do need to get our general plan approved. And one of the questions I had was that will drive a variety of programs that will be on a schedule to be implemented over time. And it's a lot. I guess we'll be talking about that as we move on, but how will staff have time for those implementations? Is it because staff will no longer be tied up with working on the housing element in the general plan? That work will be done, and now the work will be the continuation of implementation? Or, how will that get phased in?
Thank you for the question. Let me start, and then I'll go to Director Paulson. Some of the work of the action items are directly affecting our community development department, but many of them affect all town departments. And as you recall, there's a matrix for each element of the general plan, and it identifies the key departments that would be responsible for implementation. So after we get through the housing element, I think most realistically, when we're going through goal setting in 2023, we'll be in a better position to prioritize those action items. And I know Director Paulson has some other guidance for us. Go ahead, please.
Oh, thank you, Town Manager Pravetti. I think you covered it. I think we envision trying to take a more proactive approach. In the past, we have so many other priorities going on that the general plan implementation programs never really rose to the level of, well, let's bring all these to the council and get input from them on what their priorities are. So I think, we'll talk about options, and it may be, as Ms. Pravetti mentioned, that we have the priorities, we have the ordinances, then we have the implementation programs, so that council can discuss those and provide that direction. Obviously, with limitations, as Ms. Pravetti also mentioned, across different departments, because it's not just community development for a lot of those items, but we'll have to make sure we manage those expectations as well.
Excellent, thank you.
So, Town Manager, we've had two council members, and I agree with them, talk about we're not completely comfortable with the way the sustainability is worded in our goals and so forth. And one thing I was thinking is typically in most cities, the community has opportunities to give inputs into their sustainability plans and actions and so forth. Right now, with it sort of embedded in PPW, it's kind of a couple layers down, and there doesn't seem to be opportunities for the community to participate in that. So I guess my question possibly for later is there some way we can allow the community to have inputs into what we're doing with sustainability?
Absolutely, and the community did have input in the development of the general plan. So there were quite robust discussions around sustainability. It was certainly very important to members of the General Plan Advisory Board. We did hear from the public who continued to push, and in fact, even at our General Plan community meetings and other places, people continue to really mention the importance of environmental sustainability. So from a policy level, we've had opportunities. I would say sustainability really runs through so much of what we do as a town that really we would welcome those comments, just as we heard tonight. Taking care of our wildfire protection efforts, that is a form of climate resiliency. So I think as we continue to work on all of these fronts, the public is certainly welcome to participate. I see Director Morley has his camera on, and Director Paulson just turned his off. So let me ask my colleagues to also weigh in.
Yeah, I wanted just to reinforce the fact that sustainability is embedded in the organization, across the organization, and point to a few things that we do that have a significant public outreach, that have a sustainability bent to them. All of our transportation work around green bike lanes and bike and ped programs is all a sustainability effort. Our clean water program efforts, our outside the box program, our recycling program, our new SB 1383 implementation, all of those things are major efforts that have significant outreach efforts that touch the community. On the trash side, we do significant recycling efforts and outreach to the public that way. So the SVCE work that we do through Silicon Valley Clean Energy, all on its own has a significant outreach effort. So there's just a ton of things that we support, a lot of times in the background, sometime out in front. And it all brings a sustainability focus to the public for public input as we're advancing these individual elements.
Thank you for that update. That all makes sense. Let me move to Councilmember Hudes.
Thank you. I wanted to just maybe start with a couple of questions. First question is, last year when we reviewed this, we viewed it in the context of the capital improvement program. I know that was included, and I think it was about $37 million worth of spending on the part of the town. Since where we spend our money reflects our priorities, I think it's important that our capital spending is aligned with our strategic priorities. What's the plan to discuss that and add some meaning to these bullet points?
Thank you, Council Member, for the question. This year is a little bit different, primarily because of the American Rescue Plan Act funding and where we are with that implementation. So we plan to bring a CIP update to the council together with the mid-year budget review, as well as the 5-year forecast and the ARPA update. So that way we can have an evening talking about budget parameters and this fiscal information in a comprehensive way. Tonight, setting the policy goals and objectives is really important because that will help us better prepare for the February 15th meeting. And already some of the comments that you've had are going to influence how we prepare the information for you. So this does all work, but it seemed that it would be too much at this point to tackle CIP priorities in addition to the policy priorities, given all that's on our agenda for this evening. But you will have that opportunity on February 15th.
Okay, thank you. And the other question, you know, as I reflect on the strategic priorities, at the bullet point level, it's really hard to argue with any of them, or to take some of them off, or to prioritize one over the other. I think many of the residents who spoke had much more specific meaning about them. And so I feel like I could just affirm all of them right now, maybe with a minor tweak, but I'm wondering if it's appropriate to provide some feedback about or input as to what that priority might mean. And is this an appropriate time to do that?
As I mentioned earlier, and thank you for the question, really we're working on all of these fronts simultaneously. The departments are working hard in so many areas simultaneously. What I'm hearing loud and clear from both our public and our council is that we need a different communication tool to express all of this good work, that a one-page format perhaps is not really serving us well. And so we need to think of a way of how we demonstrate that all of the core goals are equally important. One is not more important than the other. Similarly, all priorities are equally important and they're getting the attention that they need. And that's why, we've really got a full plate. We're moving all of these things together, and much of it is an interdisciplinary effort. So many of the same departments are really touching all of these things. So I think we will give some thought as to how we assemble this into a better picture, and maybe it's a very different type of graphic representation, so that way it's better expressed in terms of all of the good work that the council is directing.
Sure.
If I could just interject, so there you have the work plans in our packet right after the strategic priorities, and each of those has special projects. Do the special projects sort of more or less align then with the priorities, so you can understand? You could look at those and go, okay, I can see it coming from certain priorities, and that helps you understand somewhat?
Yes, absolutely. And so that's one of the reasons why you do have the work plans, is so you can see all the core services that our departments provide, as well as the special projects. But in addition, administratively, to the point of good governance, we also have to keep innovating and making sure that we are doing our best work around transparency and accessibility of data. So for that reason, one of the major investments that we are undertaking in information technology is essentially an update of our financial and HR, our human resources database and software systems. And this will create incredible efficiencies across all departments. It's not something that's really a big public effort, but it is something that will make a measurable difference, and I think improve the accessibility of our budget document to our public, and make other information much more readily available. But this is going to be, an 18-month to 2-year project. We do have the funding for it in our IT fund, and we'll be bringing the contract to council later on in about a month or so. We're still working through the details with the selected vendor. So there are administrative innovations that are underway that don't rise to strategic priorities, because we don't need policy direction to do them. They're really things that we need to do to improve ourselves as a functioning government.
If I may, I'd like to provide some input into at least one of them. When I read about the economic vitality focused on ordinances, doesn't say much, and I just wanted to comment that I think that where we are today in the pandemic is not in a great place, and I think there's still a lot of uncertainty about whether our small businesses will be able to recover without some of the funding that came from the federal government last time around, and with the sustained challenges for both our restaurants and retail businesses that are at the core of the town. So I would suggest that we think about a coordinated recovery and revitalization initiative. And what I mean by that is to plan for the allocation of the ARPA funds. I believe we received 7.2 million. We committed about 1.4 to lost revenue replacement, leaving about 4.8, of which some of that's been allocated to other recovery efforts, but it's still a sizable fund. And rather than piecemeal it, I think it would be valuable for the town to think through the allocation of that. And I know last year I had suggested an economic revitalization board that was not met with a lot of receptivity on the part of the chamber and some others. So I think that if that's the case, we need to schedule regular quarterly updates with the council to review and allocate this revitalization funds that we have. And I think it became obvious at last council meeting that we need to coordinate the events and activities that have greatest impact on business recovery. We have some that are overlapping. We're getting requests one at a time for them. But I do think it would be valuable, since the resources are scarce, to coordinate them. I also think that we should be exploring new funding sources. There is via public-private partnerships and other money that may be coming down the line. So for instance, if Dixon and implementing the parking wayfinding is critical to our recovery, and it's going to take some infrastructure, perhaps we ought to aggressively go after some of the federal bipartisan infrastructure funds to support that. And to keep in mind an end goal of having a world-class configuration of our downtown. And finally, I think most importantly as a town, what I hear from businesses is that we need to streamline things like the permitting process, but overall to be an easy place to do business with. And so it seems to me that a coordinated strategic priority of recovery and revitalization would be really important. And I think that that's, as an example, the type of thing that would add some meat to the bones rather than just saying, you know, vitality ordinances. So those are my thoughts on that.
Okay. Did you want any response from staff, or shall I go on to Councilmember Badami?
I was just looking for a place to provide some substantive input to the priorities. So,
okay. Well, let's hear from Councilmember Badami. We haven't heard from her yet on this part.
Thank you. The Los Gatos Community Alliance and Ms. Summers brought up the need for a financial input and impact analysis. So if it were the will of the council, could this be added as a refinement to our prudent financial management priority? Or would this be a motion more appropriate at our February 15th meeting?
Thank you for the question. A fiscal analysis of the general plan is really part of the general plan update. And to do a fiscal analysis at this point in the process would significantly delay the consideration of the general plan. And typically fiscal impact studies are done when communities are faced with very stark alternatives for how they want to grow and what the fiscal ramifications of those alternatives are. We are well past that point in our process. So to do a fiscal impact study is really not going to advance the decision-making that needs to be made at a policy level for the general plan update. I think there's always curiosity about fiscal impacts, but really this town has been for many years focused on making sound land use decisions that are for the best of the community as a whole. And I think tonight we heard about, you know, affordable housing and many of the other values that community members have. So at this point, staff is not recommending doing a fiscal impact study. We're close to wrapping up comments, responses to comments on the EIR and getting everything ready for a planning commission consideration. You're interested in moving forward with general plan action items, and we really can't do that till we have a general plan in place. If it is the will of the council to do a fiscal impact study, we would come back at a later date with a scope of services to understand what kind of questions you really have around it through our annual budget process. That's really where you're going to be hearing about fiscal impacts, where we look at our revenues, we look at our growth projections, the 5-year forecast that you're going to consider on February 15th takes into account what we're seeing in terms of permitting and any big applications on the horizon. We don't have big applications on the horizon, I can tell you that now. You know, there's a lot of people who are waiting for the general plan update, and then we'll see what that might result in. But, you know, at this point, we can't be too optimistic that that there's going to be a lot of new building happening in this community. So you know, again, we can have a whole conversation about fiscal impact, and I'm happy to schedule that for another night. But if council wants to add that, you know, let me know, and I'll work with the mayor, and we can talk about the pros and cons of doing it, what kind of information you would really want to see, and what would be useful to you as you make a decision on the general plan.
So as I understand it, this could be a future agenda item if the mayor agrees to it, or would he need 2 council members to request that it be put on the agenda? Because I think the concern is that the general plan as proposed, the draft general plan, that it may not be fiscally stable based on expenditures over revenue growth. And we're looking at some numbers that are pretty large compared to years in the past. So I think that it could use or serve as a tool in determining land use intensity and a mix of land use. So would it be? Go ahead.
Yeah, again, that would really be a giant step backwards in terms of the general plan update process. If that was information that the council wanted, you know, we would have done that when we were in the alternative phase. I think it's very clear that the council is going to have a discussion about how much housing growth it would like to have as part of the general plan update. And you can do that without a fiscal impact study. You know, so I would just caution that, you know, we have to do the housing element. We can study the general plan. You know, we were on a call today with some other cities, and they've been in their general plan processes for over 4 years. So I would just caution about what kind of information you really need to consider for the general plan. And if the majority of the council want to do a fiscal study, then of course we will be happy to do it. I do see other hands raised, so I don't want to monopolize. And of course, Director Paulson is here as well to provide other advice if this is something council wants to move forward with.
So just as I finish up, then I understand if it's the majority of the council that wants it, to even get to that point, to even know if the majority would want it, would that be the mayor putting it as an agenda item for a full council discussion?
We could do it that way, or we could discuss it tonight. You know, that's up to the mayor in terms of how you'd like to do it. If there's a majority of people who are curious enough about it to have a separate agenda item, then we can be a little bit more prepared and talk about the costs of that report, what kind of data you would be getting, and really, you know, what kind of information would be most helpful for you in your decision making on the general plan. But we can also talk about it at a very high level this evening if that is of interest. And, you know, I'm hearing that there might be interest in it, which is fine, in which case I think we would probably want to come back for a more thorough discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Sayak?
Thanks. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. 2 questions. One is very minute. Looking at the strategic priorities, under transportation demand management, we have a community shuttle. And so my question is this still a priority? It's just something that we haven't talked about in a while. And is it high level enough that we have it there? If you could just elaborate and remind me, what was it that we were working on?
Let me turn to Director Morley.
So I think that this grew out of some developments that were occurring. Alberta Lane started it with a discussion. We've added it as an element of our transportation demand management asks as we have developments that come into play. So for instance, the residential element of the first phase of the North 40 has that incorporated in a payment to the town on an ongoing basis to support a future potential town shuttle. It can also be used for other TDM type measures, but that's the primary focus of that. So we are as a priority moving forward with this as we see developments that need TDM. It will become increasingly more incorporated as we get sort of implement VMT type requirements. So it's something that because it is a priority for the council, we've made it a priority and started to focus on that for development. So it's something we're moving forward with for sure.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate it. And it's still a priority for me. I just wanted to recall what it was. And then more of a larger, again, policy setting. I want to go back to affordable housing. And again, it's hard to give the story of what we're trying to do. And Councilmember Hughes has brought up the partnerships and affordable housing, as we've all discussed, it's difficult to attain, and realistically, it will require partnership with either a market rate developer or some of our nonprofit corporations. And so we've never done it before. We see the work plans of the manager's office and all the different departments. I'm wondering if it would be worthwhile, and I guess this is more a question to the mayor, the advocacy work that we as council members should be doing, that could be highlighted as well. Because I know individually, when we represent the town, we're always trying to figure out how we can advocate to either get more Measure A money or frankly, any money for any of our townwide priorities. And that's somehow not articulated in any of these work plans, but I know it's an ongoing priority for all of us. And so I just throw that out there because if we as 5 council members made a consistent effort to always advocate on a set of priorities, including affordable housing, and somehow articulate how we're doing that, maybe these questions don't come up on a regular basis. I just throw that out there. It's something we've never really done.
So you said it was a question for me, but I'm not sure what I'm answering.
I guess, does it make sense for us to list all the policy issues that we as a council always consistently strive to advocate for when we're out representing on these regional bodies? So, because that story is not being told as well.
Okay.
I mean, we could do that individually, and I could say that, but I think there's always strength in numbers, right? As a policy, what are the things that we, all 5 of us, consistently will advocate on behalf of our residents? So I don't mean to put you on the spot, Mayor. I just throw that out there because I know all 5 of us are always doing this work, and so, but it's not reflected anywhere. That's all I'm trying to get to.
Okay, that sounds like it might be an agenda item to put that together. I don't think I think that the priorities are too high level to provide guidance for us to go advocating.
And if I may, Mayor, we do have a legislative policy that guides the support of the town in its consideration of supporting pending legislation, but we could certainly have an agenda item to talk through advocacy areas for our council, so that way we're all on the same page as we work in your different regional bodies. So we could certainly do that. The other alternative is we could start with the policy committee, take a look at our legislative policy, and maybe add advocacy points, so that way it's contained in our policy document for consideration. So there's a couple of ways we could approach this.
Thanks. And I know, I think I'm going to ask the chair of the policy committee if perhaps that could also be added to our work plan as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, we're ready to move on to Councilmember Hudas.
Thank you. A couple things. First of all, I think Councilmember Sayak's perspective on our ability to advocate for policy on a regional basis is an excellent one. I don't think I went into participating in some of these regional bodies with that information and knowledge. And there's another side to it also. If the council doesn't feel that an area should be on that list, that's also important to know if we're representing the town on a body. And while I think it's okay for the policy committee to get started on it, really it's a council-wide issue. I really believe that, and I think it may need to be refreshed, maybe not every year, but at least it's not the kind of thing you can codify into, an ordinance or a policy book. I think it's a valuable exercise for us to go through, and I think given that there are some opportunities like infrastructure funding and other things that may be available that weren't before, I think it would be it'd be a really positive addition to our process. I did want to come back to the discussion about the fiscal impact analysis, and also wanted to add my voice to the suggestion that we go ahead and do that. I find that the discussion that it would set back the general plan process a bit troubling, because this is not a new idea. This was floated last year. And the choice was made to push forward without discussing it or bringing it to council. So now that we're being told that it's going to slow everything down, is a bit troubling. But I do think the bottom line on it is that if we're going to be looking at a general plan that calls for unprecedented growth in town, to date, our town has grown by just a few percentage points over a decade. Now we're talking about a 30% at least growth in population. And to ignore that the infrastructure that's needed to support that from a financial perspective, I think is really puts a whole cloud of credibility on the general plan if we don't know if we're going to be able to do that. So on the other hand, if we can't afford to do that, then we also need to put our growth in line with our infrastructure. So I think a fiscal impact analysis that looks at several perspectives. One, the infrastructure costs to support the growth. Number two, the cost of services and the staffing levels that'll be required to support a larger population. And number three, the offsetting tax income that might come from that are all key elements, I think, of understanding the fiscal impact. So whether we talk about it tonight or another night, I think that it's important that the council be brought in on this. It should not be a staff decision about whether we do this analysis or not. And I would favor agendizing it and add my voice to requesting it on an agenda at a future time if that's appropriate.
Councilmember Vice Mayor Risto.
Thank you. First of all, I was going to ask about the shuttle, but Councilmember Sayak got to that, so thank you. Regarding the financial impact analysis, I'm a little confused about a few things. I mean, first of all, that concept was brought to the Finance Commission, and I watched that meeting, and I know we have two council members here who sat here, and part of the decision or the discussion about why you would do a financial impact analysis is kind of if you were at a fork in a road. You are basically deciding you have this large swath of land. Should you develop it commercial or should you develop it residential? Or, would you consider leaving something as open space, or would you develop it? And those are not the kind of decisions that we're making in our general plan. A lot of the decisions about our general plan have to do with sustainability, mode shift, transportation. But the giant issue is accommodating our new RHNA number. And right now it's a draft general plan. The GPAC, on which I sat for a year, basically was looking at where are all the places in town where we can accommodate growth. And we weren't working toward a target number. We were basically just looking, we could do mixed use here, we could do this. And it was kind of a way to create possibilities without looking at, are we at the right number? Now that we have a draft plan that is going to go to the Planning Commission and then to the Town Council, those kind of questions can be asked. I mean, we cannot sit there and say, we don't know if we can afford the infrastructure, so we're not going to do our RHNA numbers. We are going to go for our RHNA numbers. And then it's a question of what kind of buffer or how much further we want to go with this general plan. And that's a discussion that can be continued to be had. But I think in terms of, we're not going to build it all in a year or 10 years. It'll take time to roll out. And I think as the impacts are seen, we can adjust to that. I am quite sure after seeing the communication from our new police chief, Chief Field, is already talking about her plans, and her communication style is good and strong. And so what I'm expecting as we move forward, when we've decided and defined what our community policing standards are, if we need more police officers, for example, as our population increases or as we add housing, we will hear that with communication within that department, between departments, and to us, and we'll be asked to respond, and we'll have to make decisions then. But I don't think we can sit there with this very unwieldy draft plan that we don't even know how it's going to get trimmed and edited before it finishes through the Town Council, and try to do some analysis of something that I pretty much can guarantee isn't going to pass anyway, and that we're not going to do. And I think it just doesn't make sense. We've got to plan for the housing. There's not a decision that we won't do housing and we'll do commercial instead. So I'm not seeing how it will assist our decision making. And so I really don't think that's the direction we should be going right now. We should be going in a direction toward getting community input and figuring out how we can accommodate our RHNA numbers and make a general plan that will move us forward.
Councilmember Hudish, you wanted to come back for more comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond. I too was at the Finance Commission meeting and participated in that discussion. And it was made clear at that meeting that the decision about whether to do a fiscal impact analysis was not up to the Finance Commission, that should be a council matter. And I agree with that, which is why I pretty much stopped talking about that topic during that meeting. And so I would welcome the opportunity as a council member to talk about it, because it clearly was not decided at the Finance Commission level. And I do understand that perhaps things may change in the general plan, but I think they should change as a result of a good understanding of all of the factors that will impact the town. And the finances are particularly important because over the last 5 years or so, our expenses have grown more rapidly than our taxable revenues. And so I think it's prudent and wise to understand that if we decide to accept the numbers that are in the general plan, what the implications will be on the town financially if that were the case. So I don't want to repeat things, but I do think that it's an important consideration and discussion. And again, I would support putting it on an agenda for the council to discuss.
Councilmember Badami?
believe now you have 2 council members that are requesting that it be placed as a council agenda item. And my concern with the draft general plan is that we're just not accommodating the RENA numbers. We're greatly exceeding them. And GPAC actually recommended approval as it stood, not to refine it or edit it further. So I would like to see this as well, along with Councilmember Hudes, that we do consider a financial impact analysis.
So maybe I'll just weigh in a little bit. I like Vice Mayor Risto mentioned, I'm still struggling with how a financial impact analysis will change what decision we make. What we will do, and what we always do, is we try to figure out how do we fit the requirements into, Los Gatos, into, what we call our look and feel of Los Gatos, and keeping our character, and of course not overwhelming our infrastructure. I also am trying to understand what is a financial impact analysis, because I think we could do it at different levels, right? There's a high level that shouldn't be too much work, too expensive, that might be something you might even be able to say, well, I know if I'm selling units over 1.5 million, I'm actually positive. And they're, as long as they're grouped together, there must be some kinds of things that could be gotten potentially from a consultant without too much work, that it starts us at a high level, so we can then decide maybe if we want to dive deeper or not. So maybe this is something that the town manager and I can talk over. But I would say at this point, financial analysis, I don't know what that really means. If you want an agenda item, I can go work the town manager and invent something. And my first inclination would be to do something that is less work, as a sort of first high level kind of analysis, so we can then decide where we want to go from there, or if that's good enough before we commit to a detailed analysis. The other problem I have is I don't think we really have a general plan set yet. We have some options that have been provided to us, and we don't have a recommendation of how those might change from either from the our planning commission yet. The work from the Housing Element Board might change some things also. So an analysis could end up being many different options analyzed, getting into hundreds of pages report kind of thing. And so again, that's why I'm still trying to visualize what exactly this is. And again, maybe we start at something very high level that gives council some comfort as to what different options are really costing. Councilmember Hudes.
Thanks. Just a couple things. I don't think we're going to get any guidance on this from the Housing Element Advisory Board, because they may only develop a housing element for a legal general plan. So until we adopt a general plan, we're not going to get anything from them meaningful about a new general plan. In other words, the housing element that they provide to us has to be for the general plan that's in effect. So I think relying on the Housing Element Advisory Board is not really going to help very much. But I do just want to come back to this. And I agree with the mayor that we should try to do this at a high level and do it in a way that doesn't bog us down. That's not my intention for supporting it at all. It's to provide enough decision support so that we can make a good decision about this. And again, to be clear, I don't think we've been provided any options in the general plan. We've been provided a draft general plan that has one option in it. And it'll be up to the council to take information about the economics, about the needs, the feasibility, to have a discussion about options. But we're not at that point yet where we have actual options. So I'm suggesting that the additional information would be valuable. Now, we're at the point now, though, I think, where there are at least 2 council members that have requested this for a future agenda. So I would hope that we wouldn't blow by this and would, in fact, put it on an agenda with a proposal from the town manager, working with the mayor, et cetera, to give us some ways of evaluating whether we do it and at what level that we do it. So those are my thoughts.
So that request is in, and we've certainly beat on it quite a bit. Let me see if I can bring us back to our agenda, which is our strategic priorities. I heard at least 2 council members say they were okay with the strategic priorities as they are. Let me continue to ask that question. Do we want to go ahead with as they are? Do we want to have any changes? Councilmember Sack.
I'm going to go ahead and make a motion to try and move us. I'm going to make a motion that we approve the ongoing priorities that are contained in the 22-24 document that's in attachment 3, with the understanding that a lot of what has been raised, one example, environmental sustainability, is not necessarily called out on attachment 3, but is embedded in ongoing work. And so the request is that town staff look at a different communication mechanism so that the 2 issues that I've heard, environmental sustainability, as well as affordable housing, can be called out without necessarily creating a new priority. So that's my motion.
All right, thank you. I'm looking for a second. Councilmember Hudes.
I am not ready to second because there's some things that I think could be modified that would make it stronger. So is it appropriate to voice that now, or should I wait for a second?
Let me see if there is a second. Vice Mayor Arista, would you like to second?
Yes, I'll second the motion.
Okay, then I will go back to Councilmember Hudes, who probably is going to be asking for some amendments to the motion, I suspect.
Well, I have some suggestions, and I'd love to get some feedback about whether they should be amendments. The first one is really a wording suggestion under community vitality. There's the words about seniors is engaging seniors, and I think we've heard from the Senior Services Committee, and I think we'll hear more about some potential alternate, maybe more assertive wording. And what I was going to suggest is a community where older adults thrive as a substitution for that. I did want to also suggest that the community shuttle be dropped as a priority, because I think that doesn't seem to have the same urgency behind it as some other things. And then the third item is under install bicycle and pedestrian improvements. I think what we've heard from the folks on reacting to Shannon Road and Winchester is that we need more engagement on bicycle and pedestrian improvements. So I would suggest that rather than install, which implies that these will just go ahead as written, that we engage the community and review bike and ped improvements. So I think a lot of folks feel like things are happening without them. So those are some wording changes that I would suggest. And let me just see if there's anything else here. I did notice that police reforms dropped off from the priorities, and there were other items that were included in the Judge Cordell report that don't seem to have a home anywhere, including in the work plan of the police department. So I would suggest keeping police reforms as something that we continue to work toward. So those are four that I have.
So I'll just ask a question first. So police reforms are on the in progress, implying that we're working on it right now. Did you want it on a strategic priority, kind of as a more of an ongoing, keep doing more every year kind of priority?
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing it as in progress.
So in progress, it's the second to last item says it says police reforms.
On the future one or on the previous one? On the 2022 to 2024?
It's on the previous one.
Yeah, you're right. It's on the previous.
That's what I was pointing out, that it's dropped from the current.
And maybe the town manager could answer that one. Have we finished police reforms?
Well, we completed the ones that council identified in November last year in 2020. We've implemented the independent police auditor function. We've improved transparency in terms of data reporting on police stops, and that's now an ongoing piece of our work. So it's no longer a priority. It's just embedded in our work, and our police department has improved its website to make the data more accessible. We now have a mechanism for reporting to the council on police stops, and we'll be bringing that report forward. We've had a significant discussion on mental health, and we are implementing on mental health. And those were the three priorities that council provided to us. There's more work to be done, but I think the next step is really linked to our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. Once we complete some of the outward facing community engagement that we're currently involved in, I suspect that we will want to set up some more community conversations. And I think there will be additional work to be done around community policing. It may be that we migrate from police reform as a term of art to really more defining specifically what do we mean by community policing. And I think our new chief has some ideas around a strategic plan that will involve the community. So this work is not done. I think it's more migrating to really becoming incorporated in our institution as a framework for moving forward. But I'm happy to put it back in just to make it clear that we are still open to considering improved community policing. And I would suggest kind of using community policing language as opposed to reform, which our department does such great work. And I would really I don't want our officers and our non-sworn staff to think that there's something wrong that needs fixing, but rather that we're going to continue to strengthen the good work. And I see that our chief has turned on her camera, and she might be able to elaborate better. Thank you.
Thank you, Town Manager, for vetting. Yes, we're looking at transitioning away from the police reform language and really looking to build establish some police legitimacy, really, and building that trust and the respect with our community, and bridging and healing between the police and the community. some of that divide that's occurred over time. So we are looking forward to, in the future this year, establishing some better relationships there and increasing the communication channels.
Just go back to Councilmember Hudes on this item first. What are your thoughts based on those responses?
I agree that I think community policing is a better term. I do think we need to keep it in focus because we're just at the beginning of some of these things. In fact, I really don't believe we've dug in very much to the metrics on. I know we've made some steps to tracking things, but I don't think we've really looked at that. And there were some other things I think that came up as part of that as well. That maybe they're in their first year. We've implemented a process, but we haven't really, as a council, I think, really understood how much progress we've made on it. It's an area that can blow up if we don't keep an eye on it. So I think it's important to keep it on as, but in the term community policing or community engagement.
Thank you. So let me go back to the maker of the motion and see if she's interested in making any changes. Councilmember Sack.
Thank you. I am, but if I can ask a question of Director Morley. The question is specific to transportation demand management, and there was a suggestion of removing community shuttle and changing the verbiage. I mean, really, I guess the question is, there are a lot of tools that I want to make sure your department has available specific to transportation demand management. And I agree that community shuttle may not necessarily have to be listed on this one pager, but I don't want that idea lost, because one of the things that we learned was that if it's not stated somewhere, then we can't then ask for that nexus later. And so knowing that we have to give you these tools available, does it have to be on this document, or simply if we put implement ongoing, like bicycle pedestrian master plan? I mean, I guess that's the question. What is most useful to you so that you have this still available?
So we've certainly utilized having it on your priorities as a reason to include it in the requirements for developments as they're occurring. If you wanted to remove it, we could work with that. We'll include it in future policies with the understanding that it's still something that the council is interested in us pursuing. So we do have policies that we'll be bringing forward this year as we fully develop the program. And so we can incorporate it into that if you want to take it off of this priority list. Just having the council sort of verbalize that it's still important, it's still something that we should be pursuing, and that taking it off the list doesn't mean that you're not interested in it. Is going to be sufficient for us.
Okay, thank you for that. I think what I'd like to do, I will amend my motion. I think it's been a great conversation, so that in progress, we add community policing. Again, acknowledging that the work is ongoing, and that with our new police chief and the community outreach meetings, there's an opportunity to help refine what community policing is for Los Gatos in 2022. And I look forward to interweaving that conversation with the ongoing conversations we're having, frankly, with everything else. So I think yes, amendment to include community policing in progress. With transportation demand management, I'd like to keep those 4 bullets in there. But again, I do ask the town manager, if this changes in its style, that it somehow be more broad, talk about the plans we have in place versus the specific measures. And the third change is the verbiage from engaging seniors to helping, I believe it was helping seniors thrive. I'm open to that language as well.
Okay, Seconder, are you interested in these changes? Vice Mayor Risto.
Yes, I am interested in those changes. There were other changes that Councilmember Hudes made that well, first of all, I'm good if things change, but I think the community shuttle should stay on there as a placeholder. People talk about it a lot. We're already having developers pay into a fund for that specifically. And if it ultimately becomes something else, it can, but I think it's important to have it on there. It's a solution we've talked about for a long time. In terms of the verbiage around, I'm sorry. Oh,
I believe Councilmember Sack said to keep that. She said, keep the 4 bullets. So that is in her motion.
So we are keeping that in there. Okay, then I'm good with everything she has suggested. I would not be good with removing, well, okay, yes, I'll second, the seconder of the motion is good with the amended motion. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments? I am good with the motion, so I will go ahead and call the question on this motion. Councilmember Sack.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Risto.
Aye.
Councilmember Hudes.
Aye.
Councilmember Badami.
Aye.
And the mayor votes aye, so that motion passes unanimously. So the next thing is the ordinances order. Before we go there, is there anything else anybody wants to make motions on about the priorities or comments? Seeing none, then I will suggest we move to our order of ordinances, keeping in mind that our town attorney does turn into a pumpkin at some point this year. So I'll start with Councilmember Sack.
Thank you. I just have a question for town attorney, the noise ordinance. If you could just, so right now it's number 10. And I guess my concern is, given ongoing feedback we're getting from neighbors and our interest in continuing vitality downstairs, at some point, does it make sense to just address the noise ordinance earlier rather than later so that it's clear what our expectations are?
It certainly would. It would alleviate a lot of issues from code enforcement and from my office and from planning. It would require, though, the consultant to be able to do those noises and figure out what the ambient noises are and what the areas are to redo our noise ordinance. But yes,
okay.
As I think I've recalled to you, there's been a couple of cases where before a business even opened, because we figured there would be some issues, we went out and took noise readings, and they were over the noise reading ordinance before they even opened because of the ambient noise levels that have increased with 17, with traffic from other businesses and other noises. So that's just one example of what we have done in those past is we take the ambient noise level when they're not open and try to create a baseline. So in some ways, we don't always follow our ordinance because we have to be fair and with our enforcement. But certainly, yes, it should be done, but it's not necessarily one that we can do in-house because of the complicated issues and needing an actual noise consultant.
Okay, and then if I may, Mayor, follow up on that. So your current priority, I like everything. I'm just trying to figure out where to put the noise ordinance. I do think we just need to address this sooner rather than later. And totally understand that we have to hire a consultant. Understand that with the land use ones, when the state guidance will have to act. So does it make sense to put it actually?
You could certainly move that all the way up to, which would now be 8 because I did reword them and put the social host as 3. So commercial cannabis would go 4, the SB 9 would be 5, accessory dwelling 6, 7 would be the amplified sound ordinance because that's an easier one because it's just internally can be done. But you could put that as number 8, the noise ordinance, and move it up. And then staff could come back with the budget for the next fiscal year and try to program in the cost for a consultant to do that ordinance.
Okay.
I would highly recommend that.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not making any motions yet, but just sharing that is my preference. Thanks.
Vice Mayor Risto?
Thank you. I also feel like the noise ordinance should be moved up, especially, well, first of all, it would alleviate the code enforcement issues, and I think that's important. The other thing is not only, as Councilmember Sayak brought up about our increased, economic vitality, the other concern I have is moving forward with our general plan and our housing element. We're talking about more mixed use, and I think we really need to understand how a noise ordinance works as we move forward to then intentionally allowing or planning for housing that is above restaurants or nearby, and how do we mitigate that, and what makes sense in those different contexts. So I think it's good to get ahead of that issue, because I think in a few places we're already behind on it. I completely support having the single-use disposable foodware up high. I think, Los Gatos was a leader in the past in terms of banning single-use plastic bags. I think we were trying to move forward, and the pandemic, for a variety of reasons, sent us really, really, really far backward. I mean, the amount of disposables has just exploded. It's a problem for our waste containers. It's a problem for us to be in compliance with reducing our waste. It's a problem for our waterways. And I think we just need to stop this at the source. And I think we have ways to do it. So I really support that being up high. The other one, let's see. And then the other question I have, separate from that, is I would hope that we could, right now, because our town attorney put this list together, and that's based on his knowledge and his workload and his experience with working on all these ordinances, understanding that at some point later in the year, we will have a new town attorney, and she or he will inherit this list. I would appreciate an opportunity if, after the new attorney has come up to speed, if she or he has a different slant on it or different ideas, could we have a check-in maybe a few months after the attorney turns over, in terms of finding out what they think the progress is, and if they had any recommendations for changing the priority, if that makes sense.
Yes, I'm quite certain he or she will want to do that.
Okay, thank you. And then it looks like, to move forward with the noise ordinance, that would come up at another time. We'll have to authorize a consultant, in which case that would kind of change the order of how things go anyway, because that work would be going in parallel and potentially off the workload of the town attorney, correct?
That's correct. For that ordinance, the outside consultant would do most of the labor and work for it, so they could be done at the exact same time as another ordinance is done.
Okay, thank you.
Let me just interject a question for Mr. Schultz. So I'm a little bit worried that the noise ordinance is quite a ways in the future. So we're almost definitely going to have another town attorney finish the work. That attorney might come along and say, well, this work plan didn't make any sense to me. I'm going to go get some other information. I'm just worried that how well it's going to hand off, and whether it makes sense to even get started on it until we have the person that's going to ultimately write it.
So I probably wouldn't have any input whatsoever in the noise ordinance. In my feeling, if you move this up to the number 8 spot, then staff can try to find a way to work in the consultant for the fiscal year of 2022 and 2023, which I won't be here for that fiscal year. So he would be in ground running while that ordinance is moving forward. So yes, I mean, the ones that I would probably have to hand off to them if they're not done yet will be the commercial operations of cannabis. And depending, Senate Bill 9, I might have some work into it, and he might have to pick that up, or the dwelling unit ordinance. I don't believe I would get farther than number 7 on this list, and I wouldn't get to the noise ordinance, because we just don't have the funds right now to hire that noise consultant. I mean, if council's direction at mid-year was they wanted to allocate funds for that, then I suppose we could get out for a proposal sooner to get a noise consultant on. But I don't see much of an overlap on that, because by the time the new person's on, it would be the time when you're actually hiring a noise consultant.
Yeah, and so my thought really is, if we hire a noise consultant, I think we should have the attorney that's going to write the ordinance there directing the consultant.
Yeah, that's why I think I think what I hear at least two saying is, or even three saying that this is a higher priority, and I'm sure the town manager is listening to that, and will try to find a way to, bridge that gap to hire a consultant for next fiscal year to make that work plan happen.
Okay, thank you. Let me go to Councilmember Hudes.
Thank you. I generally agree with the sequence. I wanted to add a little color to a couple of them. So I think the tree protection ordinance is incredibly important for us to preserve our natural resources, our trees, where there's been some flagrant removal of trees. So that one I think is extremely important. I mentioned before about the single use. It's certainly admirable. The information I would be looking for is whether there is a movement to do this at the county or state level, and whether that would, for us to do something that we're only going to get out front of it by 6 months or something like that. I'm not sure that it's worth doing, where that information I don't really feel like I have tonight. So I would suggest us getting attuned to what else is going on with regard to that, and if it is progressing rapidly elsewhere, then perhaps we don't need to invest in that immediately. With regard to the commercial cannabis operations, I do think, as we had in our discussion last time, that it's not just a matter of drafting an ordinance that asks whether and how to tax commercial operations, but drafting an ordinance that asks the residents whether to have commercial operations, and where to have them, and what type, what scale, how much. So I just wanted to make sure that was included. If it isn't, then I would not support funding work just to ask the question about whether and how to tax. And then with regard to number 4, again, hearing from the community and understanding the reality, I think that it's very important that SB 9 implementation have a goal of providing more access to affordable housing. And I want to maybe just comment on this, that I've heard from some folks, developers and others, that SB 9 is not about creating affordable housing because it doesn't prescribe how municipalities would do that. But it, in fact, right in the language of SB 9, it says that that's the rationale for SB 9, for allowing lot splits, is to have more affordable housing in California. And I don't think we can ignore that. So I think that that's an important part of what we need to draft in that ordinance. And since those are the ones that are kind of at the top, I wanted to just add my thoughts to what I think is important in doing those. And I agree with the order and sequence as it's been proposed.
Hey, Vice Mayor Risto, I'm still looking for a motion.
Okay, thank you. First of all, I did want to reinforce what Councilmember Hudes said. I forgot to mention, I mean, with the tree ordinance, my concern is that there's been a lot of work done on that. And between the fact that we are having more building, but also with defensible space, I want to make sure that we've got kind of the best protection for our trees that makes sense in coordination with additional building and defensible space and keeping our trees. So with that, I will, oh, go ahead.
I'll just make one comment because I want to make certain it's understood by council that the current ordinance is enforcing. I mean, we levied and collected over 50,000 last year, 35,000 from one who had removed trees illegally. So it's very easily to evaluate a tree that's wrongfully removed. The issue comes up when someone connects maybe a rope or doesn't protect the tree very well and it's harmed, but it doesn't die and it recovers. So that's the issue we really have to delve into, is what are the fines in that situation. But anybody that's removing a tree without a permit is being fined the value of that tree up to $5,000. And maybe that's what we need to look at, is even assessing more. But we have assessed large fines for people that have removed trees illegally. So it's that midterm issue that we have to figure out, is what's fair and equitable as fines and penalties for those that damage or hurt a tree. And you have an arborist that says, yes, it was damaged, but it'll recover. What should that fine be? So those are some of the issues we'll wrestle through, and we'll bring back amendments to you. But I just want to make clear that our current ordinance provides for the, if they're wrongfully removed, and has substantial fines attached to it.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that clarification. Then if I may, Mayor, I'll move forward with a motion.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so I move to adopt this order of ordinances where number one is the amendments to the tree protection ordinance. Number two is the single-use disposable foodware. I do want that one to be second. I think the Youth Commission has put a lot of work into it, and pretty much I think the kind of work we want to do will probably be more progressive than what might happen at the county or state level, and that could really be bogged down. So I think it's very important to address this issue. Number three would be the commercial cannabis operations and facilities ordinance. Number four is social host ordinance. Number five would be the SB9 issue. Number six, accessory dwelling unit ordinance. Number seven, lot merger adjustment ordinance. Number 9, did I switch these around?
You need 8, which was noise.
Oh, right, that's how I have 9. Okay, so number 8 is the noise ordinance. Number 9, shared mobility device ordinance. Number 10, public nuisance blight administrative abatement hearing ordinance. And number 11 is amendments to the sign ordinance. And number 12 would be the wireless facilities ordinance.
Okay, so I have a motion. I'm looking for a second. Mr. Hudes, would you like to second, or?
Yes, I wanted to second the motion. And again, my comments on the tree ordinance, I fully understand that we have some mechanisms, but I also support some of the ideas that have come from the community to enhance them in the circumstances that Mr. Schultz suggested. So seconding and clarifying, thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Badami.
Thank you. Cannabis is not a priority of mine, as I made myself clear at the last council hearing. However, I will support the order and the sequence as proposed.
Great, thank you for those comments. I don't see any further hands, so I'm going to go ahead and call the question for the motion as proposed. Councilmember Badami.
Aye.
Councilmember Sayak.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Risto.
Aye.
Councilmember Hudes.
Aye.
And the mayor votes aye, so that passes unanimously. And I believe that is all we need. Is there any other motions or comments by council? I don't see any. Anything else from staff? Everything's clear?
Everything's great. Thank you so much for the conversation this evening, and thank you to all of the staff who participated as well. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you to the public that participated and gave us lots of good ideas. At this point, we are adjourned.